Good evening. It has been quite some time since I was last on the pulpit. Sister Catherine asked me how long. I told her probably I preached in early January, but frankly I could not remember when I last preached. When Patrick asked me whether I can take the Sunday evening sermon, I say yes straight away, but there wasn't enough time actually because the request came on the weekend. So I prepared the notes on Tuesday, passed it over to Barnabas. Barnabas told me this morning that the notes was a little bit haphazard, and I really appreciate him taking time and effort to align the notes and give the slides a better presentation. Talking about sacredness of worship, maybe this is one area where I could take it seriously. On the lighter side, last evening we had a wonderful dinner at Sister Pearly Place, trying to raise funds for the church building. So, being the deacon there, somebody says that I should be saying grace. So I says if I want to say grace, I will have a chain player. And so nobody asked me to say grace because they were all very hungry, waiting for Pearly to set the dinner ready. This morning somebody says that usually I preach very short sermons. I say yes, the sermon is going to be short, and then probably if I find it too short, I will have a chain sermon. But on lighter side, that's not the way things should be done. I'm really appreciative of Sister Catherine, who passed me a book on letter to the church. And I think in that book, there were some thought-provoking questions that prompted me to think when I take on the deacon's job, what I can do, what I can serve the table. So in a way, it helps me crystallize the thinking of what I'm going to share with you this evening. I've entitled the sermon, Sacredness of Service. I want to read 3 passages from the Bible before I start the sermons, and then perhaps that will set our thought process going. First, 2 Samuel chapter 6. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal-Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called the name of the Lord of the hosts, who sat enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Uzziah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart, and with the ark of God, and also went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were making merry before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and trombones and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzziah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzziah, and God struck him down before his error, and he died, and then beside the ark of God. That is in 2 Samuel chapter 6. As a young Christian, I always have difficulty understanding this, and I always question, why should God punish such an innocent act? Wasn't it a very natural reaction when you see something about to happen? Would you not leave your hand to help and do it? And why did somebody out of good intention got punished? And I will touch upon that later. The other one is in Numbers chapter 20. And this is about Moses. And the people of Israel the whole congregation came into the wilderness of Sin. And in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. And Miriam died, and there was buried then. Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. And why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness, and we should die here, but we and our cattle? And why have we made us come out from Egypt to bring us to this evil place? Is it the place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? And there is no water to drink." Then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent and meeting, and fell on their face. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the congregation, and you and Aaron, your brothers, and tell the people before their eyes to yield the water, and tell the rock before their eyes to yield the water. So you shall bring water out of the rock for them, and give drinks to the congregations and their cattle." And Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, and shall we bring water for you out of the rock?" And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock and his staff twice, and water came up from abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. And you know the rest of the story. Moses was forbidden to enter the promised land finally because of this instance. If you read the context, Miriam has just died. The family was in mourning. On top of that, there was a pressing problem. They were in the desert of Sin. There was no water. And so you find that Moses and the people quarrel. What they quarreled about, you can guess. Well, there is no water, what are you going to do? And Moses probably will be telling them story that God will provide, so on, just trust in him. But the people began to insult Moses and says, "Look, you are a con man. We were promised by the prophets, by our forefather, for the land flowing with milk and honey. You have brought me out to this land, barren land, where I'm about to die. I'm about to bury here. My cattle is about to die. I'd rather be staying back in Egypt enjoying life than to be with you." And so what did Moses do? Fell down, very dejected. God appeared to him and says, "Don't worry, just speak to the rock and water will come up." It is the way of God. God is saying you, even if you speak to these hard-hearted people, there will be no use. Just speak to the rock and show them by sign and symbols that I can speak to the rock and water still flowed up, and you better listen. Instead, Moses was angry, struck the rock, and because of this, the rest is history. Acts chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira. What happened was they sold part of their property, brought the money to the apostles' feet. But they did not give all the money to the apostle. And so, when the apostle asked them, "Have you asked Ananias, have you given me all the money?" He said, "Yes." And because of this, he was struck dead. The wife came in, didn't know the story, and the apostle asked her the same question. Same thing happened. They were struck dead. What is common with all this story? These people were serving God. And I do not doubt the sincerity that they want to serve God by the fact that they have been obeying God, been carrying out the will of God. But in carrying out the will of God, there are certain things, when I read the passage, that I become mindful. These are the things that sometimes, out of your good intention, you forgot what God's basic commandment is for carrying out certain things. For example, the Ark of the Covenant. In Exodus 25, it was constructed with 2 poles to be carried around, not to be put on horses' cart and not to be drawn about by horses. And when you move, certain procedure has to be followed. You are supposed to carry the ark. So what happened was David, out of his good intention, sent in 30,000 men to escort the ark. The family, probably out of their good intention, asked the 2 sons to drive the oxen. And in the process, they completely forget about holy things that God has commanded that should be done. Out of this error, they were punished severely. Moses, well, he has a reason to be angry. He was serving a congregation who were hard-hearted, always questioning God, never taking into consideration what is good at hand, what are the blessings that God has given them. He was facing problems with his family, grieving because a dear sister has died. Nothing for him to be angry. Probably when he was insulted by the people saying that you are a con man, what was the natural reactions? Instead of remembering what God has told him to do, he just whacked the rock 2 times and said, you want water? I give you water. And that's it. And because of that, he was punished severely. So sometimes in carrying out the words of God, we have to be careful to control our temperament, to understand that service is long-suffering, and that we have to approach it with patience and with all due consideration for feelings, especially about what God intends is for his people. In our service to God, sometimes we approach things in a half-hearted manner. We do not give ourselves completely to God, either because we have some other things to consider about. When we go visit a brother who is sick, sometimes it makes me feel guilty because when I visit, it's out of time that I am free, not that I have particularly sacrificed something in order to visit him. Or do you visit him because it's an obligation, or do you visit him because you love him, you know him? So in servicing, in our carrying out of service, it is also pertinent to be mindful of this kind of thing. So I've entitled the service, the message tonight as Sacredness of Service, based on this context in mind. I've approached the sermons on 3 levels. I look at what I'm supposed to do now, then I look at the past, and then I look towards the future. Very much alike with what we have gone through during the church camp. I'm particularly impressed with 1 Timothy when he gave up the guideline for deacons. Deacons' main duties are to serve table, to render yourself available for service wholeheartedly. And 1 Timothy, of course, gives certain criteria. Certain criteria are having one wife. Those are very clear. Deacons are supposed to be of good reputation, and all this, those can be easily measured. But as I read 1 Timothy during my journey, when I was first asked to serve as deacon, I started reading to see how to equip myself, whether I'm equipped, and to do self-examination. I'm particularly struck by 3 verses which I hope to share with you tonight. First is on 1 Timothy 3:13. The verse reads, "Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and will have increased confidence in the faith in Christ Jesus." Of course, the natural thing to do is for us to focus on the respect parts and to have the confidence part. But as you meditate upon it, you realize that the emphasis here is those who do well as deacons. And what it means is when you serve, do well, finish well. And what does it mean for a person to carry out the duty well? Well, it requires, number one, dedication, determination. Number two, commitments. And number three, endurance to go on a long journey. I particularly learned this from Brother Lian Chai many years ago when we were teaching Bible class. In those days, not many men around, and the men that were around are usually the active one, and they are busy on Sunday teaching their own Bible class. So when we teach a Bible class, it's usually very small, 4 or 5. And for something like 10 years, Brother Lian Chai has been the main teacher doing this. And one thing I have learned and appreciate about this is he goes the long distance. He's determined, he's focused, he's committed if you give him a task. Come rain or shine, Sunday he will be teaching. And when I was roped to help him, I really admire his tenacity, his perseverance in carrying out this duty. So you see, in respecting the sacredness of being called to serve, at the moment, when you look at the present, when you are called to serve, the main thing is to focus on what we want to do well. And I think all the other things will fall into place. That's my thought for looking at now. Well, of course, looking at now, there is always this problem of trying to fulfill expectation. After the church announced and says, okay, we were deacons and confirmed the deacons, the next Sunday, I actually felt very guilty. Because the first morning worship, I came in late when the Lord's Supper was being served. And you can feel all the eyes looking at me. I begin to think to myself, am I fulfilling the expectation of what other expect of a deacon to be? To be early at the worship, to be focused at the worship. And of course, when it comes to serving table, what do other expect you as a deacon to do? Probably you may have to dirty your hand to start serving tables. And of this particular respects, I admire in our youngest days when we were meeting at Outram Road. It was a rented place. We have to move tables and chairs, prepare the hall for worship, moving furniture up and down 2 floors. And for those youth who remember, it's usually very hectic jobs where all the youngs will be mobilized to carry tables and chairs. And brothers of Catherine, David Ng, was particularly very active and energetic in it. Every Sunday, without fail, he will be moving tables and chairs up many trips, up and down, a young boy. And so that really impresses me that, you see, when you do not need to be asked to serve, but if you actually look around, there are ample opportunity where you can serve, and you just have to be aware of what is needed and serve it wholeheartedly. And that probably will leave good impressions on others because you serve out of clear conscience. Self-discipline, I think it's important. I struggle with that sometimes. I think my main weakness is procrastinating. If I can postpone something, I will postpone something. But then, when it comes to serving at worship, serving at Bible class, serving the needs of others, self-discipline, I think, is very important. You have to walk the talk and go the long way. So in this, what do I need at the moment? I think I need support, I need prayer, I need to be a little bit patient, to be more listening, to be attentive, to know what are the needs of the congregation. As I tell people who ask me how have I been doing as a deacon so far, I say I haven't started running yet, and probably it's going to be a long run. I do not know what is ahead, but frankly, I know about these things, that there, in serving, as I mentioned, in the light of the 3 scriptures I read, there are chances of failing. You have to be on the lookout of this. In serving, you have to be determined. You have to go the long distance. And in serving, you have to make an example so that others can remember you. First Timothy chapter 3 verse 10, I call this looking at the past. They says before they are appointed to be deacon, let them be closely examined. And the words that struck me most was closely examined. When I was nominated to be a deacon, the natural reaction was to run away. And to run away, you find excuses. And it's not very difficult for you to find excuses. I just give you 2 examples of excuses when you can run away. First, when you come to saying grace at the table, let's have a chain player. After the first lesson, nobody will ask you to serve anymore. When you want to give a short sermon, you say, I want a chain sermon. Nobody will ask to change it. Finding excuses, I think, will be very easy. And it is the natural reactions when you ask somebody to serve. First reaction that comes to mind is, are there excuses where I can find? In my walk on this process, I am particularly encouraged by certain category of people. First, they were the previous elders and deacons. They had an unenviable task at hand because they have to choose wisely. And in order to choose wisely, they have to do the unpleasant task of closely examine the people that were nominated. The question you ask, were they offense or were they cause sensitive misunderstanding? It's very difficult for you to ask questions. And while you are closely examining these people who are nominated to be elder, they are also closely examining you. It's a natural process. They will be thinking, why are you asking me these questions? Are you sincerely going this for the betterment of the church? And by going through this process, I understand the pain, the love they have for the congregation through their action, through the interaction process I have with them. I'm appreciative for their prayer for each and every individual. I appreciate their efforts to make the final selection, even though in the process of doing this, some may be hurt. They themselves may be hurt. So it is a task that they take on that give me great encouragement to follow their example. I'm also very touched by the concerns of members and people I know for years. When I was nominated, they talked to me privately and says, yes, I'm going to nominate you. And the reason why I nominate you is this, and this. And they were frank, they were encouraging. In the process, you have people dropping you notes, telling you, yes, I'm praying for you. I'm hoping that you take up the challenge. And those touch my heart. They give me great encouragement to know that congregations as a whole do not put up nomination for the sake of putting up nomination. They put up nomination because they felt that you could add value, that you could serve them. And so for that, I'm very touched and very encouraged. I'm particularly encouraged by my wife and family. In fact, I told you about my wife. I say nagging, and as a joke, Brother Buchai says, tonight I'm offering you my spare tent. So in case you cannot sleep in your house, you can use my spare tent to sleep. So I said, thank you very much. But it's not nagging, because wives are concerned about the spiritual well-being of their husband. And if you know every wife, when they love you, they will rather prefer that you go heaven and do not miss heaven because of a mistake you had. They rather prefer not to go heaven, but if they go heaven, they want to be with you. And so my wife encouraged me to think about it. What do you want to do with your life? Life is short. You are no longer young. And when you retire with your spare time, do you have any more excuse not to serve? She talked to me. She encourages me. My son says one very important statement that set me thinking. If you are asked to serve and you find that there are no reason for you to reject, you have to serve. And I think that is a very logical choice. So I took on this task and began a series of self-examination. And I asked myself whether I'm equipped to serve, whether there are issues with myself that congregation do not know, that I do not wish them to know, that I rather keep the dirty secret to myself. Wives, families, they are the one who knows me better. They are the one who knows me in and out. When the congregation examine me, they only see the best part that I put forward. And so during the sermon last week, there are certain dark secrets that we don't want people to know. But as I explore further into this, and as I get encouraged with this, I have to tell myself, no, I'm prepared to serve for a particular reason. And so I come to the next slide. It's called Looking at the Future. 1 Timothy 3:9, they says they must be committed to the faith now revealed and must live with a clear conscience. I ask myself, what is it that I've committed? What is the faith that I committed? And are they dear to me? Will this thing motivate me to serve? Will this thing be a guiding principle for me to hold on to my faith in case I feel disappointed and along the way I stumbled? Where are the foundations? Where are the anchors that I can anchor upon? Ephesians 5:32, we are told that this mystery is profound, and Paul is saying that he refers to Christ and the church. Of course, before that he was talking about husband and wife, but they say, no, don't be mistaken. There is actually a further mystery, and this refers to the church, with Christ being the head of the church. And in Ephesians 5:29-30, he says, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. As I ponder upon this, I begin to realize a profound things. You see, when you have a problem with your heart, you need a heart transplant. So what do? You find a heart that is healthy. You don't find a heart that is already damaged. And you find a heart that your body do not reject. And in the case of Christ, something more profound is happening. My heart is damaged. My heart is sinful. But Christ has joined me to his body. And instead of his body rejecting me, his body has made me whole. And so that is something very profound. And so if you really, and as I thought about this, if I really believe and sincerely appreciate what Christ has done, there is no reason for me to hate the body of Christ. In fact, I must cherish it all the most because of what the profound nature has been. I, a sinful man, if I join with the body of Christ, I'm supposed to be rejected, but now I've been made whole, a part of his body. And that is profound, and that is a driving principle when we are called to serve. The fact that we have been made whole, and that grace can never be neglected. Second thing that really encouraged me and crystallized this together is this principle of that we are a piece of his holy temple. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, 1-4. As soon as Solomon finished his praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple, and the priest could not enter the house of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled the temple. That was dedication of the temple of Solomon to God. What happened? God's glory came down. The whole congregation saw it, how glorious was the temple. And when all the people of Israel saw the fire came down and the glory of the Lord on the temple, they bowed down with their face on the ground on the pavement and worship and give thanks to God, saying, "For he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." I will be very happy if I'm part of the congregation, seeing the glory of God come down and fill his temple. But now a greater thing has happened in the New Testament. Ephesians 2:19-22 says, "So then you are no longer stranger and alien, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostle and the prophet, and Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together, grow into a holy temple." Previously, you could only stand outside and look at the glory of God coming down into you. But now, in the present context, God has made it in no uncertain term that instead of you seeing from the outside, you are part of the temple. You are the stone that built the temple. And as members of the congregation that built the temples, you share in this glory. In him you are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. And God now dwelt in you as part of the temple. And so, being builders, when you see something beautiful, something majestic, it goes against your very nature to tear down that thing. You do not take a sledgehammer, start knocking down something that is beautiful and majestic. You try to preserve it. You try to restore it. You try to service it when it's not in working order. And so it is with the body of God. Because I am part of the temple of God, a part of the stones of the temple of God, and I am a glorious thing that God created. So do I tear down the temple of God? It's very easy for people to look at the way and the direction in which the congregation is going from the outside and start giving comment. Why should not certain things be done this way? How can it be done better? And this is my suggestions. And you can give comments, you can complain, and you can give direction to what you like it to be. But when you see something that is not working, when you see something so glorious, will not it be reasonable for you to take up your tools and start building it, strengthening it when something is not working, rather than to just give comments, passing remarks, without offering solution? So all the more when you think about this, there is no reason why when you are called to serve, you do not really serve. In fact, you must be obedient to respond to the call for service. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16 to 17, I think, tell us in no uncertain term. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. And so if you are destroying God's temple, whether directly or indirectly, there is a serious consequence. And so that is something that I have been mindful when I come to realize that. So, all in all, what I would say is that, yes, because we are part of that glorious temple, we must be a workman that constantly repair the temple. And the final thing that I want to share with you is found in Ephesians 1-4, also about the church. It says, even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him, in love he predestined us for the adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ according to the purpose of his will. And in Ephesians 3:8-10, he said, this grace was given to preach to the Gentile the unsearchable riches of Christ and to bring to light for everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God who created all things, so that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in heavenly places. Yes, God created the church to be an example. He created the church to show to the heavenly angels what his wisdom and his love is. It is an example for him to tell the heavenly host his great love, his wisdom, his grace, his magnificent knowledge of what things are and what things ought to be. And so if you are created to be an example, and if you do not take up the challenge, when you proclaim yourself to be members of the church, to be an example, you are actually doing God a disservice. You are actually showing the negative than showing the positive. And God, by his wisdom, has ordained the church to be structured in such a way that everyone should work together, giving glory to God, and become an example to the heavenly beings that are so awestruck by this magnificent wisdom of God. And so this is something that we have to bear in mind when the challenge comes for you to take up the call to serve him. And this is part of the sacredness of service. So God showed the heavenly beings his incomprehensible wisdom. He created the church not as an optional, not a model for connecting to God. He created the church as a model for connecting us to God through Jesus Christ. And you must remember, no angel enjoys the same privilege. And in fact, if you are an angel, you marvel at the fact that man has such a privilege where they do not have. And so this is something that you must treasure. And so the key takeaway to end the sermon, as I say, why service is sacred. Of course, there are pitfalls along the way by the three examples that I have illustrated. We have to be careful when we serve, to seek wisdom and to seek prayer, to be constantly sincere and rely on the wisdom of God in whatever we do. We have to serve with a clear conscience. It's sacred because there is expectation for us to fulfill. Sacred because in the process and along the way you constantly examine yourself. Sacred because of the exhortation that you give to others, of the exhortations you receive from people, of the exhortations that you can give to God. And so all in all, I have to come to the conclusion when the call comes to take up this challenge, because there's just no reason to run away. What particular reason do I have to run away? And therefore, I conclude that the call of worship, the call to serve, is a sacred thing. And I hope to end this short sermon with this takeaway from you, that when you are challenged to serve, take up the call, because it is a sacred call. Thank you.
Awesome wonder, consider all the world perhaps have made. I see the